Apple Watch Ultra, in-depth review. To begin with, this watch is not particularly spectacular. I say this because for the average user, the only big meaningful difference in this watch is the battery life. Of course, Apple's decked it out with adventure features, but how is it for normal people? Let's talk about that. Hi there, this is a Citizen EcoDrive. It continuously charges on all kinds of light, and in total darkness, it runs for 6 months on a single charge. We're going to talk about that more at the end of the video. Starting with fit and finish, obviously, this is an adventure watch. The diving band is comfortable and apparently quite durable. Honestly, the only thing I think I don't like about this watch's aesthetics is the lack of color options, and maybe it's a little too aggressively chunky, and also I can't get it in matte black. Fingers crossed for some adventure-proof color options next year. On the note of colors and bands, I was really happy to see that Apple made the Ultra compatible with all other Apple Watch wristbands. While it doesn't look great with a lot of other bands due to its chunkiness, it's nice for Apple to give users a choice for once. Currently, the roughest, dustiest thing that I do is bouldering and hiking, and even though I've bashed up my watch fairly well, there's not a scratch on it. Actually, correction, there is one small scratch on it, and the band is still in perfect condition. I have some beef with how the digital crown works, but we'll get to that in a minute. Next, let's talk about the action button. I like the options which are currently available. However, I'd really like it if the button could be used to launch pretty much any app. I worried that this button might accidentally get pressed a lot, but I think it's only really happened once or twice, so it's kind of a non-issue. One aspect where I think this button could be hugely useful is shortcuts. One use that I've already found which I really love is, you guessed it, habit tracking. With the action button, I can launch my journal's templates, which I can then tap on to create an entry using the hashtags I desire, thereby tracking my habits. Ta-da! I love the idea of being able to track my habits this way. My only gripe is that every time I do this, my watch asks for permission to access my journaling app, and I'm not really sure why I can't give ongoing consent here. All in all, I really like this feature, and I'm looking forward to new ways in which I can use it. Next, let's talk about the siren. Honestly, I was really underwhelmed by this. It isn't that the siren is necessarily weak, but when Apple presented this concept, I had imagined something startlingly loud, especially given the size of the watch and especially as a survival feature. I even waited until I was outdoors and in a remote area to test it. Honestly, I'm sorry to say that the siren might be useful in a very small number of circumstances, but ultimately it won't reach more than, say, 20 feet, especially in the snowy terrain where I tested it. All in all, it's disappointing. Next, forgot my iPhone. So, I forgot my iPhone pretty recently, which I thought would not have been such a big deal. I'm kind of pissed off because this should have been something that my watch immediately told me about. As it stands, however, even if your watch disconnects from Bluetooth on your phone, it will not inform you that you've left your phone behind. Given Apple's latest push with the Find My network and especially AirTags, this is such a huge and obvious oversight. What's even stranger is that I have notifications set up for when my iPhone is left behind. The only way, however, that I found to get those notifications is to literally have a second iPhone with me. It's so strange that I'm wondering if maybe I missed something. Let me know if you figure it out in the comments. Next, let's talk about something I really hate about my Apple Watch, the charger. One of the enduring problems with the Apple Watch is the proprietary charging. I hate that I can't charge my watch in any other way, even with other Apple certified Qi chargers. With almost any other device, I can just borrow someone's cable when I forget mine. But with my watch, I can't even use other Apple wireless chargers, and that's kind of ridiculous. What's even more annoying is that the Apple Watch obviously charges wirelessly, and Apple refuses to allow charging with any other device. As is often the case with Apple products, this exclusivity makes the product worse. And on the topic of things that make the product worse, let's talk about Raise to Summon and Hey Siri. The Raise to Summon feature is extremely hit and miss. What's weirder to me though is that aside from the accelerometer data, you're basically yelling in Siri's ears. So it's strange that she wouldn't sit up and listen when this happens. And while this feature is kind of lacking, it's also one which I'm really rooting for. The idea of being able to reliably raise my watch to summon Siri would be so immensely helpful. I've talked before about the problems associated with having multiple Siri-enabled devices, and frankly, it's a complex engineering problem, and this could easily be a part of the solution. What's strange to me is that Apple actually added a couple of extra microphones,
so you can be heard, even in extreme weather.
making it extra weird that this summoning feature doesn't seem to have improved at all. Speaking of microphones, something else I've noticed about using Siri with my Apple Watch is the way it integrates with AirPods. Now, Apple has gotten way better at switching AirPods seamlessly between devices, and I'll talk about that in another video. But when I use Siri with AirPods and Apple Watch, there is a noticeable lag. From the time that I say the summoning phrase to when she actually starts listening, there is enough of a gap for 3 or 4 words to go missing. This is especially vexing when it comes to queuing up a song. Ultimately, I really want to be able to stop using summoning phrases, but It's still too hit or miss to use the raise to summon on my wrist. Next, let's talk about connecting Apple Watch to Wi-Fi. I tried doing this when I left my phone behind, and honestly, it was awful. And even though my watch has full access to my keychain, it doesn't automatically connect to Wi-Fi networks, which I know and use. Furthermore, it's staggering to me that there's no search function within the keychain. Lastly, that as is the case with my iPhone, my watch doesn't automatically recognize the network and suggest the password that I've used in the past. It's one of those things where I feel like this watch is supposed to be a bit of a lifesaver in a pinch, but in this case, it's actually more cumbersome. Now let's talk about the digital crown. It could just be me and my bony wrists, but I often find the digital crown will rub against my wrist bone. This makes the crown harder to use as it doesn't rotate freely. Sometimes it can be hard to get it to rotate at all. As you can see, with the Ultra, Apple put a guard around the crown to mitigate this problem, but the guard they designed doesn't really seem to guard against the actual issue, which is the wrist skin. I've even tried flipping the orientation so that the crown is on the other side of my wrist, and I still get a lot of interference from my wrist skin. Wrist skin. So fun to say. Wrist skin. Wrist skin. Where were we? My first thought is that this can't just be a me problem. Furthermore, if Apple had added a tiny piece of metal to the bottom of the guard that they already put in place, this would be completely solved. I really hope they fix this issue in next generations. It's a problem I've experienced with previous models, and it's honestly very annoying. Talking about adventure features, let's talk about automatic wayback tracking. So upon launching the Apple Watch Ultra, Apple talked a lot about the life-saving features that this watch presents, one of which is wayfinding. According to Apple, this feature may at some times when you're off the grid activate automatically. The parameters for what off the grid means are just a little bit vague here, however, so I'm assuming they mean no cell reception. In my opinion, however, the kind of people who have the propensity to get lost in the woods are not generally the kind of people with the forethought to lay down a waypoint. The automatic wayfinding feature should enable almost any time a person is walking or exercising, and what's weird is that it kind of already does, in that if I go for a run, the health app will show me where I ran. It's really odd to me that this data is only really available to me after I've completed the workout. These features could be married together quite seamlessly, but they aren't. It should be simpler than this, and it should be automatic. But enough with the constant complaining. Let's talk about the new low power mode. I really like the new low power mode that Apple Watch Ultra has instituted. With previous models, low power mode basically just nerfed your watch. It went from being a heart attack detecting wonder to a thing that would eventually tell you the time, assuming you waited long enough after you pressed the button. The new low power mode really just turns your Apple Watch Ultra into a Series 3. So you still get notifications and most functions. It just doesn't have an always on display, automatic workout tracking, and a couple of other features. Ideally, Apple would just let us customize the features we don't want to use in low power mode, but for Apple, that sounds like asking for just a little too much freedom. Okay, back to complaining. The built-in thermometer. Apple has clearly stated that Ultra has a temperature sensor under the glass of the display. This is a cool feature. I'm a little annoyed that it's only designed to be used with regard to sleep data and diving. More than that, as a nerd, it would be cool sometimes and kind of useful to know the temperature of my room using my watch. On the note of thermometers, I would really love to see Apple using body temperature sensors to integrate with HomeKit. Imagine your watch realizing you're cold and turning up the heat for you. Lastly, we're going to talk about focus mirroring. This one is a little more specific to me, I think, so it's not as important. Somehow, my Apple Watch has lost the ability to mirror certain focus modes. I have a custom focus mode called homework time, which my watch doesn't have on the list and will not use. I could live with this, but it also doesn't acknowledge or have sleep mode, even though I've told it to mirror on my phone's focus. Why is this a big deal, you ask? Well, primarily the issue is battery life. If my watch doesn't go into sleep mode, it will run normally all night, eating away at the battery significantly, generally to the tune of about a day's worth of battery life. My watch also no longer accurately tracks my sleep. I spent about 2 hours with Apple Tech support on this one, and all we've been able to discover is that it has something to do with my new iPhone. I only mention it because it is definitely negatively impacting my user experience, and I'd like to know if other people have. Ultimately, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this watch. While there are some very real, useful survival features built into it, there are others like the alarm and the battery life that make this feel a lot more like adventure cosplay. This isn't a watch for crossing the Sahara. This is a watch for dentists who like to scuba dive. Also, in my user experience, it was very buggy to begin with, or I should say, it was buggy in a couple of ways which were really irritating to me. Apple has this line in their commercial where they say,
Of course, none of this matters if it falls off your wrist.
but the same is true if the battery dies. It's kind of shocking to me that in the hundreds of years of self-winding, self-charging watches like the EcoDrive I talked about at the beginning of the video, that Apple hasn't figured out a way to make a watch that lasts more than 3 days. Maybe they have, maybe they're just saving it for next year. And yes, I know these watches are doing way more than my Citizen is, but even so, these batteries are tiny, and it does make you wonder why we can't go from 6 months to 1 week with some added capability. While I love how rugged this watch is, I know that I can still scratch the case when I'm climbing, and at the end of the day, I still find myself wishing for a hybrid of the Ultra and the Series 8. I want a Series 8 with at least 3 days of battery life and lots of pretty colors. And I want an Ultra with either an astounding battery, think like a week or two, or some kind of self-winding or charging tech integrated, some way to keep it alive in the wilderness. Because a watch that can barely last 3 days and can't be charged in the wilderness isn't, in my opinion, a survival watch. Okay, that's pretty much it. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. I'm BRB, this is BRBTG, and as always, I'll be right back.